Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabby.com. Gabby takes the pain out of shopping for.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by N.B. Turner. It's titled, Is China an Imperialist Country? And it's from a relatively Marxist point of view. I think you'll find it fascinating. This is from the introduction. It has long been known and understood that the entire world has been under the control of capitalist imperialism. For a time, a section of this world broke from it, beginning with the victory of socialism in Russia and continuing through the Chinese Revolution, constituting a socialist world. Yet in time, the socialist countries, through internal class struggles in politics and economics, were seized by capitalist conciliators and advocates, and then by capitalists themselves, who were largely within the ruling communist parties themselves. First in Russia and later in China, when these counter-revolutions and coups took place, there ensued a period of entry and integration into the world imperialist system. The Soviet Union, at first under the existing signboard of socialism, continued much of its established national and economic power relations into a new socialist imperialist bloc, socialist in name, imperialist in reality. The Russian capitalist imperialist attempt to maintain this bloc, or important sections of what had been part of this bloc and its historic allies, has continued in the years since the socialist signboard was discarded. In China, the defeat of the proletariat and the capitalist capture of state power after the death of the great revolutionary Mao Zedong have also led to a period of integration into the world imperialist system. China still operates under a socialist signboard, but has conducted itself unambiguously as a capitalist power. Before the last decade, especially since the demise of the socialist bloc, the U.S. was commonly seen as the sole superpower to which all other powers had to defer. The system which the U.S. had designed at the end of World War II was global in scope and to some more democratic in appearance than the old colonial empires. But it was built around the elitist privilege of power and authority, meaning the U.S. as superpower was at the centerpiece of the controls. But in the last decade, the imperialist world system is not what it used to be. Throughout the world, corrupt and comprador regimes have faced significant and often unprecedented mass popular opposition movements, which have revealed the deep instability of the old neo-colonialist arrangements. Even in the EU, the product of imperialist designs to supplant the historic internecine battles, there has emerged ever-deepening crises and conflicts and movements to assert nationalist interests against one another. Against the threat of Islamic fundamentalism, the imperialist system was directed by the U.S., has launched wars such as in Iraq and Afghanistan at huge cost, trillions of dollars, and immeasurable losses in political credibility and imperialist authority, as neither war has won any of the U.S.'s objectives. These clear failures at the hand of the largest and most powerful military force in the world do not bode well for maintaining the U.S.'s hegemonic domination of the world's imperialist system. And the economic and financial crises of the last half-decade or more have stirred not only deep discontent, resentment, and popular political opposition within the ranks of the U.S.'s reliable allies, but it has brought to the fore the imperialist anti-U.S. challenges from other major powers, specifically China and Russia. Forces worldwide are studying these changes and considering how they must change the set of options at hand. The all-too prevalent view that U.S. imperialism is so powerful, so dominant, and so capable of manipulating all manner of forces and bending them to its will has been, and continues to be, a dangerous twisting of reality. The sole superpower in this view has been attributed with omnipotent features that defy effective challenge, that reflect a supposedly skillful control of contradictions and crises that afflicted earlier empires, and that has a boundless ability to disguise its malevolent work. If it were true, it would be a remarkable development in human history. Indeed, it would be, as once touted in the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union and bloc by Francis Fukuyama, the end of history. That is, the end of historical conflict and systemic changes. It would be an expression of the boastful and fanciful capitalist post-Mao motto, Tina, there is no alternative to capitalism. There are others who assert that the U.S. is not so omnipotent and that it is in decline and maybe failing, but that the U.S. and its close allies constitute the only imperialism that matters, and that if all its detractors, victims, opponents, and its imperialist rivals band together, liberation will truly be achieved with the demise of U.S. imperialism. This view also holds that whenever big powers like China or Russia rise in opposition to the U.S., they deserve the support and applause from progressive and revolutionary forces. Holding this view are a variety of forces who cling to the notion that the Cold War division of the world is still extant, and that popular protests in recent years from Libya to Syria, Ukraine, and Venezuela, as well as Brazil and Turkey, Iran, even inside Western China, are all examples of U.S. meddling and desperate interference. This view holds that without such U.S. manipulation and interference and disruption, the people would, by and large, be happy or passive. This is by any measure an amazing claim, denying the existence of class contradictions and struggles within each of these countries, and making it appear that the conspiratorial powers of the U.S. to manipulate events are unparalleled in reach and effectiveness. In practical political terms, this view distorts the basic reality. Is China an imperialist country?
I think we're down to just around 60 or 70,000 people in the state who don't have power, which is a substantial improvement over a few days ago. And the loss of power here in Portland for basically a full day seems to have scrambled a few things internet-wise. My apologies if we've had, hiccups and weirdnesses with our streams and with our shows. Our podcasts are put together by a couple of friends of ours down in Texas, and they've had no power, so our podcasts have been down. It's just been Mercury's retrograde. Until next week, it's been a particularly bad week, and we've got it good. Louise and I only lost power for one day and heat. There are people in Texas, as a consequence of decades of Texas Republicans adhering to this idea that government is an evil thing and you just have to rely on the fossil fuel industry and the billionaires it makes to make life good. As a result of that, you've got people in Texas who have no heat, have no power. It's really cold there. And now, as the power is being restored in large parts of Texas, they have no water. Welcome to Republican utopia. Back in 2016, I believe it was, or maybe 2018, Ted Cruz tweeted out, "I'll believe in global warming when Texas freezes over." His old tweet is now kind of going viral as a meme. Right. Right. You think he's going to come out and say, I believe in global warming? I doubt he's going to say that any more than he's going to say that it was his responsibility to go to Cancun during a disaster. He's blaming it on his daughters. Oh, we had to do it because of the girls. Right. Next up, he'll be blaming it on his wife. And poor Snowflake, right? Ted Cruz's dog who was stuck at home. Anyhow, it's Anything Goes Friday. Whatever you want to talk about today, 202-808-9925 is our telephone number. In the second hour of our program, Aunna Dennis is going to be with us, the executive director of Common Cause in Georgia. The Georgia Republicans have some really sneaky crap going on, trying to completely change the way that people are allowed to vote in Georgia, to try to suppress the black vote, particularly the urban black vote, cities like Atlanta, and raise up the white suburban vote. And we'll do a deep dive on that when that happens. David Sirota, he's got this newsletter called The Daily Poster that you can subscribe to. I get it. I subscribe to it. David's been on this program many times. His current issue, the one that came out, I believe it was today, it might have been yesterday, is a headline, "Progressives Aim to Take Over Michigan's Democratic Party." And this is what I have been telling you about for the 18 years I've been doing this show, but in particular since 2009 when I saw Republicans doing this. When the Tea Party and Freedom Works and some of these groups, this Concord, whatever it is, coalition group, reached out to Republican voters and said, we, the crazy right here in the Republican Party, need to take over the institutional Republican Party. The Tea Party Republicans need to take over the Republican Party from the Mitt Romney Republicans or the Bob Dole Republicans, the business, the pro-business Republicans. They need to be pushed out, and the pro-fascism Republicans need to take over. And they did. And the Republican Party, this led a straight line from that to Donald Trump and to all the craziness we've been seeing. And what I've been saying is, we need to take a lesson from that. The so-called far left of the Democratic Party, those Democrats who support Medicare for all, who support ending student debt and having free tuition at state universities and junior colleges, and who support a Green New Deal, rebuilding America's infrastructure in a way that is not adding to our carbon load. Those policies, and I wrote a piece about this morning over on Medium.com, those policies, complete with the links, those policies are supported by more than half of Republicans. But there is this BS notion called bipartisanship. I was watching TV this morning. I was watching CNN this morning, and Poppy Harlow had on Pat Leahy. And Poppy is really, really smart person. She's really bright, and she's really good. And I find her program, her and Jim Sciutto, they do a pretty good job for what they're doing, right? But this morning she had Pat Leahy on, and as a Democrat, a senator. He's the Democratic senator from Vermont, the senior senator. He's been the senator longer than Bernie has been. And in fact, he's in his 80s. And she said to him words to the effect of, this isn't necessarily a verbatim quote, but it's as close as I can remember. She said, don't you think that by trying to move ahead with this $1.9 trillion COVID package and the other legislation that you're proposing without Republican votes, that you're making worse the partisan divisions in America, that you're tearing America apart? And Leahy's response was, well, we hope to get some Republicans on board. My response, if she had asked me, would have been, these are already bipartisan positions. Come on, Poppy. Just because Republican politicians who are owned by billionaires and the corporations that made them rich don't want to go along with these things doesn't mean that Republican voters don't want to. We're going to start ignoring the Republican politicians, and we're going to start paying attention to the Republican voters, because the Republican voters are with us, with progressives, on these issues. Literally all three issues that I just named. You've got majority Democratic support. The links are in my article. But back to my point of where I started with this thing with David Sirota, I've been talking about taking over the Democratic Party. Well, they're doing it in Michigan. The headline of his piece today, progressives aim to take over Michigan's Democratic Party. He's quoting from a guy named Liano Sharon. I'm assuming it's a guy. Yeah, he uses the word his. Liano Sharon, he joined the Democratic Party in Michigan in 2016, just 5 years ago. He's got a website, michiganprogressive.com. And the old line corporate Democratic establishment in Michigan was just going out of their way to block progressives in Michigan from getting anything done. And so he and about 20 other people got together, and basically they've taken over the Democratic Party in Michigan. There's an election tomorrow, on Saturday. It's an election within the party for party leadership and party rules and things like this. And he's got 123 people running for positions within the Democratic Party. And this is pretty amazing. He just lays the whole thing out about how there's multiple units. There's 82 counties, 14 congressional districts, multiple statewide caucuses and clubs. It's a total of about 10,000 people who actually participate with the Democratic Party in Michigan. It's not that many. It's not that hard for organized progressives to take over the Democratic Party in a state, and they are doing it in Michigan. Now, they may not succeed in the vote tomorrow, but I guarantee you that they will a year from tomorrow or 2 years from tomorrow, because they are moving in that direction. They've got the wind behind their back. This is happening. And they've already got the state party platform to endorse single-payer health care, even though Gretchen Whitmer, the Democratic governor of the state, is opposed to it. Which is pretty amazing when you think about it, right? So you can do this too. Whatever state you're in, show up with your local Democratic Party. The meetings are now by Zoom, but show up and participate. You can take it over.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
All that said, as I opened the show, it's Anything Goes Friday. We have one guest for one segment at the top of the second hour, but the rest of the day, I'll be taking your calls on whatever you want to talk about. And welcome back. Dave in Valley Forge, California. Hey, Dave, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just want to continue your rant on Republicans admitting states into the Union. Mm-hmm. And you got to Benjamin Harrison, and Benjamin Harrison, you talked about him admitting North and South Dakota.
Right, I think it was 1898, as I recall.
Right, November 2nd, 1898, he admitted North and South Dakota. On November 8th, 1898, he admitted Montana. On November 11th, 1898, he admitted Washington State. Then, 8 months later, on July the 3rd, 1890, he admitted Idaho. And then on July the 10th, 1890, he admitted Wyoming. So he admitted 6 states in 8 months. We went from being, when Benjamin Harrison started, we had 38 states, and by the end of his first year in office, we had 44 states.
Can you send me a link to that, Dave, please?
I just got it out of my World Almanac. I don't have internet type.
Really? Okay, I can do research. That's fine. I'll dig into that. Thank you for that. And I'm guessing pretty much every single one of those states was a Republican state, right?
Well, okay. In the election where Benjamin Harrison beat Grover Cleveland, mm-hmm. he was a minority president. He won the electoral vote, but not the popular vote.
Right.
And then I heard many years ago that Harrison did this, and he said that the Republicans would control the Senate forever after he did this. So I don't know if that's true or not, but
well, it makes sense. I mean, these were back then the main schism. I mean, this was the end of the 19th century. The main schism had been. I mean, the Republicans had largely purged themselves of the so-called radical Republicans, but they still, the Democratic Party at that point in time was still the party of the South, the party of segregation. That was the year of Plessy versus Ferguson, I think, or maybe it was 2 years earlier. That was 1896. But Plessy versus Ferguson was then the law of the land, and the Republicans were by that point they were no longer the Rights for Black People party. That had been blown up really after 1876 with the Hayes what's his name election, and Tilden Hayes. Yeah, thank you. And so fascinating. I'm going to have to look into that, and one of the cool things about writing these things over at Medium.com is that I can continuously edit them. I can go in and change them. So I will take that information and add to it, and I'll look for that Benjamin Harrison quote because that's a juicy one. And thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for that. It is such a privilege. Dave, thank you very much for the call. It is such a privilege to hang out with you guys every day. Because I learn as much as I teach. And I've always kind of thought of myself as a teacher, as somebody whose job was to kind of bring something, bring fire, and yet you bring fire to me constantly. I'm so grateful. Anyhow, it's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. You know, there's so much news coming out of the Trump administration, so much corruption, so many crimes. Oh, you know, now they're letting people kill endangered species. Now they're selling off, you know, the Arctic National Wildlife Preserve, refuge rather, to big oil companies. Oh, now they're they're authorizing pesticides that we know cause birth defects and damage to children. It's just, you know, step after step after step that it's so easy to forget that back in July of 2020, it was reported that Jared Kushner and Mike Pence's nephew, John Pence, created a couple of LLCs, American-Made Media Consultants Corporation, that took $617 million of Trump campaign cash, and nobody knows where it went. I'm telling you, these guys are professional grifters. We need to keep an eye on it. There's a whole rant about it over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. And welcome back. Anything Goes Friday. What's on your mind today? Daniel in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Daniel, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, thanks for taking the call. I just wanted to have, a kind of a brief 3-point overview about wealth inequality and get what your thoughts on it are.
Go for it.
I mean, okay, well, you know, the first point is, you know, that the major point is that, you know, wealth inequality is not going to be addressed until the income tax system is rationalized in some type of a logical way. I mean, taxes are, point number one is taxes are what we pay for government goods and services. I mean, that's indisputable. What those services are is the political debate. But, you know, the second major point is until they start treating all income the same, I mean, it doesn't matter what the income is. A buck is a buck is a buck, whether you get it from salary and wages or capital gains or food stamps or
yeah. How is it that Donald Trump
source
claims to be a millionaire with a billionaire with a multi-million-dollar a year income, and in over an 18-year period he paid $750 in total in income taxes? How the hell does that happen?
Well, I agree. I mean, David K. Johnson, who helped the New York Times write stuff as an expert, he's been following Trump for decades now and has some incredibly revealing stuff about Trump. But until they broaden the tax base to treat all income the same, you just don't really have anything to work with. I mean, that's a major source of inequality. And until they're willing to fix that, and I mean, it could lower taxes because the base is so much broader. I mean, that's point number two. But the third point, and this is what I'm interested in, you know, my idea is that you need to have one tax category for everybody, and that's a corporate tax. That would eliminate a lot of problems. It doesn't matter whether you're a charity, whether you're corporate America, whether you're an individual, whether you're a trust fund. Once you put everything into one tax category, you can't manipulate the system as much, and it makes things a lot fairer. I mean, sure, you're going to have a progressive tax, but for individuals, you can define an individual as a corporation for one, keep track of the revenue, keep track of the expenses, and until you do something like that, nickel and diming the changes with whatever the politician is, whether it's Elizabeth Warren or whatever, is never going to fix things.
Yeah. So, well, you know, until the Reagan Revolution, the top corporate tax rate was over 50%. The top personal income tax was over 50%. It was 51% for corporations. It was 74% for individuals in 1980 when Reagan came into power. And you know, when Reagan dropped both those numbers, right now the top corporate tax rate is 21%, with literally millions. Well, I don't know if it's literally millions. There's certainly hundreds of thousands of potential loopholes that corporations can employ to get that number down. So that, you know, I read that long list yesterday of corporations who not only didn't pay taxes, but you and I gave them money. You know, we sent hundreds of millions of dollars to them. Absurd.
But, you know, I mean, Elizabeth Warren had one good idea, which has a lot of merit. I mean, some of her ideas are not workable.
Are you talking the wealth tax or are you talking the stet tax?
No, neither one of those. Elizabeth Warren's proposition was that it's absurd for corporations to be able to report billions of dollars in profit in their Wall Street financials and billions of dollars in losses on their tax return. Her proposition was the standard is generally accepted accounting principles. That's what you use for financial reporting. That's what you use for your tax returns. And that makes eminent sense to me. I happen to be a CPA. So.
Okay. No, it makes sense to me, too. I mean, the state of New York right now, the major fraud issues that they're looking into with regard to the Trump organization, you know, the Trump crime family, essentially, and now, you know, big news, the Cyrus Vance, the district attorney in New York City, just hired arguably the top mafia prosecutor and defense attorney for the mafia in the history of America. As he's 69 years old, he's with a white shoe law firm, Paul Weiss, I think it is, and they just hired this guy away to specifically investigate the Trump crime family. And what they're looking at is the possibility, the probability, in fact, I'd say the certainty, based on Michael Cohen's testimony, that the Trump organization for decades has kept two sets of books, one for the tax people and one for the banks, and that's tax fraud and bank fraud. I mean, that's a crime. It's a major crime. It's the decades in prison kind of crime. And what's so bizarre, as you're pointing out, Daniel, is that big corporations are allowed to do the exact same thing. They have one set of books for their stockholders, their shareholders in Wall Street, and another set of books for the tax man and woman, but they do it right out in the open. And they've drilled enough loopholes in our tax code that they're allowed to get away with it. Trump was Trump was having to sneak stuff and lie to people, and because that's just kind of his default mode, I guess. I'm with you, Daniel. We've got to change these things. Thank you very much for the call, and your points are all very well made. I think, in defense of Elizabeth Warren, I think she had a lot more than one good idea, but that meme, that notion that a company, whatever the company reports to Wall Street, should be what they report to the IRS, that is brilliant. We'll be right back. Coming up on the bottom of the hour here. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Thom Hartmann with you. Stick around. For Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, Amax, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Rhodesian
the former prime minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum No. 39. This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so that South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire.
On the Science Revolution this week, Dr. Bandy Lee, Yale School of Medicine author of The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, joins us on how Trump and other cult leaders infect their disciples. Plus, Professor Richard Silberstein, Chief Scientist and Director of Neuro Insights Research Program, drops by to explain the neuroscience of the creative geek. Have you been described as brilliant or genius, eccentric and or socially clumsy, absent-minded, and an independent thinker? This segment is for you. Tune in to The Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. And welcome back. Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Nancy in Norcross, Georgia. Hey, Nancy, you're on the air. Thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. What's up?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I'm about to open probably a can of worms. no politician will talk about it. But my question is concerning the tax-exempt churches.
Mm-hmm.
And the mega churches that have raised so much money and don't have to pay taxes. And I'm not against churches and helping people in their community up to a point, but why can't there be a cap on that and then they be accountable for a mandatory audit thereafter? Because so many of the mega churches have influenced the Trump administration. They've been influenced by it, and no politician will talk about getting rid of the tax exempt on churches. So if you have any insight, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, this is how Pat Robertson became a billionaire with a B. This is how dozens of televangelists became multimillionaires with 2 M's, as well as the pastors of some of these very, very large churches. And how Garner Ted Armstrong built an empire, right, is all on on their tax-exempt status. And even as in the case of, Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, who's a Trump-humping hustler, and he's now on CNN every morning going, let's pray to Jesus together and then call our numbers so that we can hustle some donations from you, too. These people are, he's even, and his buddies, they're even basically having their housing exempt from taxes. I pay property taxes every year. Most Americans pay property taxes every year. Not the pastors of these churches. That's my rectory, don't you know? And I think it's crazy. I have no problem with giving a tax exemption to a monastery, to a group of people who've decided to live apart from society because they want to pursue spiritual practice. But frankly, if a monastery was incorporated as a for-profit corporation and it showed no profit at the end of the year, it wouldn't pay taxes anyway. And that's true of any church. If a church is not showing, see, you do the exact same kind of accounting for a for-profit corporation as you do for a nonprofit corporation. You list all the income categories, you list all the expense categories. At the end of the year, there's something left over or there isn't. If there's something left over in a for-profit corporation, it's referred to as profit. If there's something left over in a nonprofit corporation, it's referred to as the fund balance. In other words, the money that you carry forward into the next year because it's not subject to taxation. Whereas a for-profit corporation, that profit is subject to tax and, minus exemptions. So, churches, in my opinion, if a church is being run like a church, if it's being run to serve its people, if there's any leftover money at the end of the year, rather than distributing it basically or carrying it forward into the next year or distributing it to the pastor and the senior elders of the church, why not pay taxes on it? And the other thing is, your taxes and mine, your property taxes and my property taxes are subsidizing fire and police and public lighting services and public roads that all of these churches use. And why aren't they paying their fair share for that? I mean, what's so sacred? I realize, the strange use of that word, but why are churches the golden calf? Why are they the thing that can't be touched? Why are they, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. It's just, is it such that they found so many loopholes to get past?
It goes back to the 1950s, Nancy. In the 1950s, there was this kind of religious revival in America. It was being led by the Billy Graham types. I don't know if Billy Graham was part of it. And that religious revival, I believe this is when Leonard Leo and, or maybe I think it's him, when the family got started, this group that Jeff Charlotte has written a book about called The Family, and there's a 4-part series on Netflix, as I recall, about the family. In fact, I'm in it, and Jeff's been on this program a number of times. And I believe it was in the 1950s that they started the National Prayer Breakfast, and then they started reaching out, inviting members of Congress to actually have housing. You've got a bunch of Republican members of Congress on E Street. There's this big old mansion or row house, fancy row house in Washington, D.C. that's owned by the family, which is a nonprofit organization. And so they don't pay taxes, and they give like super cheap rent, you know, a couple $100 a month to these members of Congress who want to live there. And you know, they're calling it their church, their rectory, whatever they call it. And this is when we started seeing Christian hustlers who don't believe in democracy. And this is the thing that Jeff Charlotte lays out in that documentary that is just shocking over on Netflix, called The Family. That they literally think that we should have strongman government, Donald Trump kind of government, that, you know, where the will of the people be damned. We know what's right. God told us what's right. We're going to use biblical principles, etc. And they have extraordinary influence over the Republican Party and some influence over the Democratic Party. And back in the 50s, as they were acquiring power, one of the things they got was massive tax exemptions for churches. And Lyndon Johnson was the Senate Majority Leader at the time, and he stepped up and he said, that's okay, we'll give you that tax exemption unless you engage in politics. If you mess in our territory, if you mess in politics, you're going to lose your tax exempt status. And churches respected that from the 1950s up until 2000, up until the George W. Bush presidency. And in 2000, George W. Bush started actively reaching out to those churches. They started actively reaching back out to him in that 2000 election. I mean, they had been to a smaller extent prior to that. But this was when there was actually a movement for right-wing churches to openly preach politics from the pulpit and defy the Internal Revenue Service and say, we're going to ignore the law, which, by the way, is anti-biblical. I mean, you know, the guy came to Jesus and said, you know, who should I follow, right? And, you know, with his coin, should I pay taxes? And Jesus said, you know, give unto Caesar what is Caesar and give unto God what is God's. In other words, follow the law, pay your damn taxes, and then, you know, get on about your business of being a religious person, a good person. And, but, you know, they ignore that. And we now have pastors preaching on right-wing radio. You know, there's like 1,500 right-wing talk show hosts who are purely political. There's probably another 1,500 religious religious stations, radio stations around the country. And, you know, in fact, back in the 70s when Louise and I lived in Detroit, I used to listen to one of them when I would drive to work at RCA every morning. I was very into religion at that time. And they never talked about politics. Never, ever. Not a word. But now you tune these stations in, and their politics is like every other sentence. And they should be losing their tax-exempt status immediately. These churches should be, that have been openly defying the law for 20 years now, should be losing their tax-exempt status. And frankly, I think the tax code needs to be rewritten. And, you know, if churches don't want to pay taxes, don't show a profit at the end of the year. Don't show a fund balance at the end of the year. But I'm with you, Nancy. And,
I mean,
and I'm going to...
How can...
Go ahead.
How can we get something done about this? It's like a mammoth, you know, problem.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people who follow these folks, and they're politically active, and they've got their tentacles inside the Republican Party and to some extent inside the Democratic Party. And it's hard for any politician to come out and say that they're, in opposition in any way to organized religion, particularly Christian religion. And so I think any effort to do this would be met with howls and screams and things, and it would almost have to be part of a more comprehensive overhaul of our tax code. But a starting point, just a simple starting point, Nancy, would be to put teeth into the Johnson Amendment, into the law that says that churches lose their tax-exempt status, and make it retroactive. Although you can't pass ex post facto laws, you can't pass really retroactive laws. So I guess we can't do that. But in any case, put teeth into this law so that when churches are violating the tax code, when they are violating the law, when they are violating the agreement that the churches made with the federal government back in, I think it was 1956, but it was in the mid-50s, that they lose their tax-exempt status and they have to start paying taxes. Very straightforward, and the IRS should be paying attention to this. There should be a division within the IRS paying attention to this. So how do we get there? I think, again, being active in your local Democratic Party, trying to get that onto the platform, some of the county and state party platforms, that we want, at the very least, we want the Johnson Amendment to be enforced. so that, churches can't participate in politics if they want to maintain their, and the churches, whenever you say this, they go, oh my God, you're trying to gag me. No, we're not trying to gag you. We're just saying, if you want to break the law, pay your damn taxes. It's not like we're talking about sending preachers to jail. I mean, that's how they behave, right? Like, oh, they're gonna.
Thank you.
Nancy, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. It's 45 minutes past the hour. That is one of the issues that is so rarely discussed, that is a political weapon Republicans are using. It should be discussed more.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. And let's see here, Skip in Seattle. Hey, Skip, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Well, I'm using my second and last ticket for the year. I think people should limit themselves to twice, Tom. I remember back
Ticket?
in tickets to call Thom Hartmann. They're hard to come by.
Okay.
January 29th, you referred to an email in the New York Times reported by Luke Broadwater from a guy named Miller, who was Trump's Secretary of Defense. And it was an order to the National Guard, do not mess around tomorrow on the 6th of January. You may not do a whole bunch of things. You can't protect anybody. You can't, no riot gas, all that stuff. And you were quick to say, we're not sure if it's authentic or not, but it did kind of put a shiver up a person's, you can't use the National Guard unless I give you a direct order.
It has been authenticated, by the way.
It has been. Well, good. Then I just went up that with a Republican friend of mine in a gated community. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I wrote an article about that over at thomhartmann.medium.com, and it has the actual PDF of the actual letter in it. And it is an actual letter. And Chris Miller, the former acting Secretary of Defense, who was installed by Donald Trump after Trump lost the election. He took out the previous acting Secretary of Defense and put in this guy. And then this guy ordered the National Guard to stand down just a couple days before January 6th. And I personally believe there's a connection between those two events.
The most charitable explanation I could come up with is we're trying to avoid another Kent State, but that's stretching it. Just knowing the temperament of Trump and his crowd. Thanks again, Tom. I'll let you go.
I agree. Thank you, Skip. Good talking with you. I appreciate the call. Let's see here. Steve in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind?
Well, hey, Tom. I have a friend who is a good liberal as opposed to progressive, gets most of his news from the New York Times, and it's so frustrating to talk to him because his heart's in the right place, but he says that he likes some things that Republicans say and that we should try to get along with them and talk to them. And I said, well, what's something that you like about the Republicans? And he said, fiscal responsibility. And I know that they're not fiscally responsible, but I was hoping you could give me a good retort or reply to him about that issue.
Yeah, what was fiscally responsible about Ronald Reagan taking the national debt from $800 billion when he was elected to $2.4 trillion when he left office? And that was all because of massive tax cuts he gave to billionaires and wealthy people. What's fiscally responsible about George W. Bush having 2 wars that he didn't even include in his budgets that each cost over $1 trillion? The war in Iraq cost us so far over $2 trillion. And the war in Afghanistan is approaching that. Never budgeted to have them paid for. What's fiscally responsible about George W. Bush having over $2 trillion in tax cuts that are off budget? Inflating. I mean, George W. Bush inflated the national debt massively. What was fiscally responsible about $1.5 trillion tax cut for rich people by Donald Trump, when $1.5 trillion is the exact amount as all the student debt in the United States, which is holding back an entire generation of young people from getting married, buying houses, and starting their lives? What's fiscally responsible about that? That's insane. That's not fiscal responsibility. Steve, I got to run. I can give you more examples, but I'm sorry, we're out of time. That's a good start, though. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. So we need to be thinking right now about how to Trump-proof the presidency in the future. I mean, Donald Trump is causing all kinds of chaos and disasters, and things are, frankly, I think, going to get much worse before they get better. And I don't think they're going to get better until after January 21st and or January, noon on January 20th. And that's assuming that, absolute craziness doesn't happen. But, there's a bunch of steps that we need to take, from recalibrating or fixing how we do our elections, to fixing how we handle money in politics, to fixing the pardon power of the presidency, to specifically saying that if a president is found to be a criminal, he or she can still be held to account. I mean, just straightforward stuff. And we need to be getting ready to do this. I lay it all out in a new video for people who support our program that you can find over at thomhartmann.com. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We'll be right back. Geez, sometimes you get these cliche is the wrong word. It's kind of a mental tick stuck in your brain. But anyhow, let's get back to your calls here. Kimon in Dayton, Ohio. Hey, Kimon, what's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to just put this information out. I heard an caller earlier in the week. He was lamenting about the OJ decision, and America has got it wrong. I watched that trial from beginning to end, from gavel to gavel. The prosecution did not present one speck of evidence, not one, that OJ killed Nicole and her boyfriend.
Ronald, what's his name, yeah? Ronald Goldman.
Yeah, right. Not one. I watched it. And I defy anybody in the audience to call up and tell us what they presented. Now, the other thing is the person who actually killed both of them, his name is Glenn Rogers, and he has admitted that he killed them. He is a serial killer, a convicted serial killer. And at his trial, that he is currently on death row, but at his trial, when he was convicted of murders that put him on death row, he had a brooch. Not him. His mother wore a brooch to that trial that belonged to Nicole Simpson, that he had stolen at the time of the murder. Now, he has admitted all of this, but none of this has come out in the mainstream, in any media that I've heard. It's just a shame that Black Americans keep the way we are depicted in the press. If now OJ did have some culpability because he
was convicted in a civil trial by a jury of his peers, which included black people.
Yes, he was, but the burden of proof is less in a civil trial.
You're right.
And you don't have to have a unanimous jury. So
you're right.
The fact that everybody was saying that, he did it, and he got away with it, I think that affected what happened with the civil trial. Now, I detest O.J. Simpson, I really do, for reasons other than his trial. He was asked to contribute to the National Negro College Fund, and he said that he didn't go to any nigger college, so he wasn't going to contribute a dime. So people like that, I have no use for at all.
Yeah, I get it. Kimon, I really don't want that word used on the air, and I'm gonna end the conversation right here. I guess Sean dumped it for most of our stations, but I understand what you're saying. Debbie in Oakland, California. Hey, Debbie.
Yeah, I was wondering, is there anything new about the missing panic buttons? I don't know if you heard about
from
it.
Iona Presley's office. I'm wondering too. I mean, I've got so many unanswered questions about what happened around January 6th, and where her panic buttons went is one that I don't have. I have no idea, and I've not seen anything in the media about it.
Yeah, I know. Because
apparently you haven't either.
Like a month, and I mean, I can understand during the impeachment, but I thought they'd be, now that it's over, they might have picked up the story again.
Yeah. Well, this is where I think that we need a serious prosecution. I don't want to see a 9/11 style commission. I'm going to be writing about that over the weekend. I just the Warren Commission, the 9/11 Commission. In my opinion, the Warren Commission, was designed to basically whitewash what happened in that assassination, and the 9/11 Commission was designed to reduce public consciousness of the role that Saudi Arabia played in 9/11, or Saudis played, shall we say, in 9/11. And they're political groups. And what we need are a grand jury and serious prosecutors. And one of the questions they should be asking, and I'd be astonished if the FBI isn't looking into this right now, Debbie, is what did happen to those panic buttons. I'd also like to know what's going on with I think it's now they're up to 35 police officers among the Capitol Police who are under investigation. Some of them were having selfies taken with these traitors who attacked the Capitol. Some of them, opened the gates and let them in and seemed quite pleased about that. It's just like there are so many unanswered questions. Debbie, thank you for raising that really need to be answered. And they need to be answered not in the context of, oh, here's the information. They need to be answered in the context of, we're going to nail the SOBs who did this stuff. Right? We need to track these people down and hold them accountable. That's the essence of justice.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabby.com. Gabby takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabby.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.
today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled A Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled Australia, There Will Be Blood, the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations, plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, "Oh, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control." With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy. And it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. Book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman.
It's October Surprise.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Aunna Dennis is on the line with us, the Executive Director of Common Cause Georgia. CommonCause.org/Georgia is the website, the Twitter handle, Common Cause GA. And Aunna, welcome to the program. I understand the Georgia legislature has some brand new voter suppression tricks up their sleeve. Tell us about this.
Yes. Thank you, Tom, for having me. So this cycle, we have seen a lot of things happen with voter suppression and voter fraud narratives. And what we see happening in our legislature as of this week, this is systematic voter suppression. We have seen over 40 anti-voting bills that have come through our legislature. We've seen a lack of transparency with notifying the public of these bills. As of yesterday, we've had our House Omnibus, we like to call it our Omnibus bill, that's appeared. But within 2 hour notice, we actually had a committee hearing on that bill that's actually also taking place today. So those are some of the antics that we're seeing with systematic voter suppression in Georgia as of today.
Do the Democrats have the power to stop any of this legislation? And can you give us any of the details of exactly how the Republicans with these new laws are intending to suppress the votes?
So with the suppression of the vote, the Democrats will most likely be able to add amendments to these bills, but we do have supermajorities in our House and our Senate on these bills. That's the compositional makeup of our legislature. And what we've seen this week is that there have been votes along party lines. With some of the bills, we see restrictions to eliminate no excuse absentee voting, which is actually a system that was in place by Republicans 15 years ago and has actually been working well. And we have seen previous to this election cycle that more Republicans have actually used this as their voting mechanism over Democrats. We also see things as eliminating drop boxes, which were critically needed due to what's going on down here with COVID, because we're actually still a hot spot down here. So the pandemic hasn't died down down here. We also see restrictions like needing to have a photo ID to submit your absentee ballots. We see restrictions of having a chief czar of our elections down here, where counties will not have the ability to be able to conduct their elections on their own, but this is something that taxpayers, my dollars, will actually have to pay for, but we will not have representation with this czar. So these are some of the things that we're seeing. There are many more. There are many more bills as well that are going through the legislature.
I think I read that there were one of the provisions that was specifically targeting African American voters in Georgia was making it illegal to vote on Sunday. and I don't know, claiming some kind of Christian principle there. But that the souls to the polls thing,
Yes.
people go to church and then heading down to the polling station has been going on for a long, long time. I lived in Georgia for I think 13 years, and and that was back in the 80s. It was going on. So this is pretty precision targeting, is it not, of African American voters?
It's definitely precision targeting of voters of color, people who are just now starting to vote. They could be first voters. It's definitely creating a culture of voter suppression. It's creating a culture of efficacy in our election systems and a distrust of our election systems down here. We've heard from our Secretary of State that there literally was no fraud and no tampering of our elections this cycle. We also heard from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation that there were no instances of fraud and there's no instances of tampering. And so now we see, because we've had mass people who've gone out to do Sunday voting, mass people who are using drop boxes throughout the week, mass people who are actually requesting a vote by mail ballot, and also people who are becoming poll workers to actually be a part of this election process. We now see these types of attacks because there's certain folks in Georgia who feel as if their election was stolen or there had to be fraud because of the outcome. And so now we see these attacks and these rollbacks to the great gains we've actually had down here. So definitely,
I don't think they actually believe that, Aunna.
Minorities and voters.
Yeah,
you don't
respectfully,
think they believe that?
I think that there are Republican voters who believe this line of whatever you want to call it that Donald Trump is shoveling out, that the election was stolen from him. But I don't think that you have any Republican legislators. I mean, they're familiar with the process. They know who Brad Raffensperger is. He's the guy who oversaw throwing hundreds of thousands of people off the voting rolls. Maintaining a fine tradition after Brian Kemp. And he said, there's nothing wrong with this election. I think they're just saying, hey, when black people vote, Republicans lose power, and so we're going to stop black people from voting. I mean, this has been, replace the word Republicans with the word, white racists, and this has been the strategy in Georgia since the beginning of Reconstruction, or the end of Reconstruction in 1876.
Since Reconstruction, and it definitely falls in line with the 1980s Southern strategy. And recently, I was actually reading the Georgia Republican voting report, and I was actually matching it to the different ensembles of these anti-voting bills that we have. And it definitely targets our different types of community. I'm a woman of color. I'm a black woman. I'm a mother, and I think about why I go to vote and how I go to vote and what mechanisms I use to actually go to vote, which means that because I am a working mom, I have to make time throughout my day to figure out when I actually can go to a ballot box. I vote in person because I want to take my daughter so she can understand the voting process and also get to know our precinct managers, who are some people who actually live in my community, because we do believe as a community to be engaged in our elections is to actually be a poll worker and be a part of it. So I think about those things. I think about the rollbacks that we're having and then what we have coming down the line. We have reapportionment coming down the line. So this is definitely an onslaught of trying to restrict the power of the people and the voice of the people. And we know with this election that we had the highest turnout that we have seen in Georgia. We had over 7 million registered voters, and each of our elections, our general election and our Senate runoff, we had over 4 million voters vote in our elections. And now we're seeing these different types of attacks when, like you said, the Republicans know that there was nothing wrong that happened with our elections. Our Secretary of State has said it. Our GBI has said it. So why are we instituting these Jim Crow suit and tie policies now?
Yeah, well, and we all know why. We're talking with Aunna Dennis, the Executive Director of Common Cause Georgia. And Aunna, we only have about 35 seconds left. Would H.R. 1, do you know, if that legislation passes the House and Senate and gets signed into law, would that roll back or push back any of these things that the Georgia Republicans are proposing?
It actually would give us more provisions and protections here in Georgia. So we are definitely telling our members, definitely telling our communities to rally, cry up. We need H.R. 1 passed because we need extra oversight in our elections here in Georgia and more provisions and protections for the voters here in Georgia.
Yeah, H.R. 1, also called the For the People Act. It would clean up a lot of the election craziness around the United States. Aunna Dennis, Executive Director of Common Cause Georgia, commoncause.org/Georgia, Common Cause GA on Twitter. Aunna, thanks so much for dropping by today, and keep up the great work.
Thank you. Take care.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and you're doing such vital stuff. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Aunna Dennis, if I misstated her name. Talk Media for the Rest of Us continues. And welcome back. Oh my goodness, let's see here. Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, thank you for hanging on so long. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the imbalance in the Senate, but while I was listening, I don't know, you have something on the TV and something on the radio that are different when you're taking your breaks, but on one of them you were talking about the situation in the 1980s with Oliver North, the CIA, Ronald Reagan, and so on and so forth. It reminded me...
Yeah, that was from Barbara Honegger's book.
Right, and she was a guest quite often on KAZU Radio in Pacific Grove on the Mae Brussel program, Dialogue Conspiracy. I don't know if you are aware of Mae Brussel. She was the granddaughter...
I'm not, but Barbara Honegger has been on this show several times.
Yeah, so a lot of that stuff came out. And, I'm not sure that Trump had the same sort of connections that the Bushes seem to have. Although, it comes around again. Apparently he did have quite a bit to do with Saudi Arabia. It just seems that Saudi Arabia is such a, I don't know what really to call it. They're in the background. They're haunting the United States in more ways than one so often. And I don't know what Biden
it's
might
like the
be
dark
doing
planet,
about that.
that you can only identify because it perturbs the orbits of other planets. And you say, oh, well, there must be a planet there. There must be a sun there in that galaxy or a black hole or something because everything's behaving weird. And I think you're absolutely right. Saudi Arabia plays that role, particularly for the Republican Party. And all you have to do is look at, what happened after 9/11.
Yeah, and, oil should be a resource that has less and less of an effect on government. And this goes to Texas. What's going on there with, the governor somehow trying to blame wind power or solar power or the lack thereof during this polar vortex. And I'm glad that guy called in from Iowa yesterday because he said up in Iowa, their windmills are running just fine during this time of below freezing temperatures. So if they work in Iowa, why can't they work in Texas? Well, Texas is very oily. It's very gassy. And we need to get away from that. I hope Biden, would come out and say something about that and counter what Governor Abbott said and just kind of point out that he's like Trump. He's just full of BS. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Here again, I mean, ads have to be put out there about how good renewable energy is more and more. I already saw one ad on TV, obviously from the gas and oil industry, talking about how, we can't, we need them. We need that as a resource. It's sort of going against any chance that there could be a new Green Deal passed. So that has to be countered. And, I'm willing to donate some money, and I would hope that some of the major solar companies or even Elon Musk would get off the dime. Let's get Bezos, Zuckerberg. They're phony progressives if they don't do something about it. And
I'm with you, Dennis, and we need to spread the word. We need to absolutely spread the word. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream.
So we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are signed up, for supporters of our program. And it's about how Donald Trump, 16 days after Mr. Khashoggi was murdered by the Saudis in Turkey and his body dismembered and vanished, 16 days after that happened, without notifying Congress and with virtually no mention to anybody, Donald Trump authorized the transfer of top secret nuclear technology to the Saudis. This should be a serious issue. Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, is raising hell about it because Khashoggi lived in Virginia. But I think everybody in Congress should be raising hell about this. And when you back this up with this new report out from ProPublica that the Saudis were involved in 9/11, it gets real interesting. So you can check that out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for our basically members-only video.
Welcome back. Picking up your phone calls here on Anything Goes Friday. Jeff in Columbia, Missouri. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to talk about quantitative easing, a process by which my understanding is the Federal Reserve can simply create money, and then Joe Biden talked about canceling student debt, and my understanding was he was going to use that mechanism to do it, much as was proposed by the Green Party candidate in 2016. And of course, if I understand correctly, was used to create, I believe, $15 trillion, or about 10 times the amount of all student debt, to pay off the investor class when the economy collapsed in 2008. So anyway, I wonder if you could amplify on those things.
I don't have the specific numbers at my fingertips, but the amount of money that was created in 2008 by the Fed to bail out banksters was multiple trillions of dollars. It was absolutely massive. And what they did with that money, we were horrified to learn years later, was they paid themselves huge bonuses, which is, literally multi-million-dollar, and in some cases, multi-billion-dollar bonuses to individual banksters and their families and friends and everything else. Quantitative easing is part of the process of the Fed buying and selling treasuries, and which is how they, in theory, regulate interest rates, but also how they regulate the size of our money supply. And I'm not sure specifically how quantitative easing necessarily ties into the student loan debt, and I don't have any specific information suggesting that Biden or any of the Democrats were suggesting that the $1.5 trillion in student loan debt out there be reduced by the Fed doing it, but it could be done that way. I mean, and this is something that Stephanie Kelton talks about, in modern monetary theory, that the Fed creates. If you wanted to wipe out the federal debt, the federal government has the ability to denominate currency, or coinage rather. They can define the value of individual coins. She suggested that they mint, a dozen $1 trillion coins, and then simply redeem them, with the Fed and pay off the national debt. There's a lot of conversation about that, but it's not going to happen. I mean, the Fed has been explicitly using this funny money that they create. Most recently, I believe it's $7 trillion was created last year in response to the COVID crisis. And all of that money was used, virtually all of that money, was used to either buy corporate bonds, which is, in other words, to loan money to corporations. Bond issuing is how corporations borrow money, and to buy corporate stock to maintain the value of the stock market. And the current Fed chair is continuing that policy. So, you know, we have, and the United States is not unique in this, by the way. The Japanese began this more than, almost 2 decades ago. The European Union is doing it now. The Central Bank of the UK is doing it. There was a piece in the Financial Times over the last 3 or 4 days saying that global debt right now is 350 times, or 350% of 3.5 times global GDP, which is pretty mind-boggling. Here in the United States, our federal debt is almost equal to GDP. Now, it surpassed GDP back at the end of World War II. It was 129% of GDP. It was, our federal debt was greater than, the entire output of our country, but that was also, what it took to fight World War II and defeat the Nazis and the fascists in Japan and Germany, Italy, and Spain. And that debt got paid off, by the way, by Dwight Eisenhower borrowing even more money to stimulate the economy by building the interstate highway system and new hospitals and new schools and roads and airports and infrastructure, and just, providing a launching pad for American business, which is what the Green New Deal is all about. Frankly, I think that if the Fed is going to generate create out of thin air $7 trillion, as they've done in the last year, and use that money to bail out giant corporations, monopolistic corporations, and keep the stock market high so that wealthy people's investments, keep in mind 80% of the stock, of all stock in the United States is owned by the top 10% of Americans, that if the Fed is going to do that, the Fed ought to be able to create $1.5 trillion out of thin air and use it to pay off student loan debts, at the very least. And we need to have a conversation in this country, which we're not having, about this relationship between the Treasury and our national debt and the Fed and the way that it creates money and alters the money supply in order to benefit the investor class and the corporate class pretty much exclusively. And why are these tools that the Fed has not being used to benefit average working people? Why are they not being used to reduce student loans? Why are they not being used to make America a better and safer place to live? Why are they not being used to rebuild this country? Instead, they're just being used to bail out banksters and United Airlines. I was going to say I don't get it. I do get it. I know what's going on. I think we all get it, but it needs to change. Jeff, thank you. Thanks for raising an important issue. Hitting the bottom of the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, taking back the mainstream media with talk media for the rest of us. It's the place where we dare to say, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, no, not a chance.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925. And
now there is Amazon or IBM or Microsoft or any of these other companies that seem to manage not to pay any taxes like you and I have to, but still claim they're persons.
Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee,
which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super-rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scott poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, a liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap-and-trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that you all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right by Jane Mayer. You You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. So what makes Trump supporters Trump supporters? Good question, right? Well, Psychology Today did a deep dive into a whole bunch of literature on this and a number of studies, and concluded that there were 5 characteristics that crossed right across virtually all Trump supporters. I do a deep dive on these on our video over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program today. But here's essentially what it says. Number 1, they are authoritarians, by and large authoritarian followers. They want a strong father figure to make them feel safe. Number 2, social dominance orientation. They believe in a caste system and they think they should be in the top caste. Number 3, prejudice. They view people of other races poorly. Number 4, intergroup contact. Most of them have never experienced significant contact with people of another race or people, deeply different than them. And number 5, relative deprivation. They feel like they've been screwed. They're not sure why. And Trump tells them, oh, it's those brown people. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. Back, Thom Hartmann here with you, and try to get the folks who've been on hold the longest here. Bruce in Petaluma, California. Hey, Bruce, what's up?
Okay, good morning. I was thinking a lot about global warming, and I don't think a lot of people kind of get what that really means, even though, you hear a lot of talk describing it. And I'm beginning to look at it like the Earth as a living molecule. And when you get a fever, and the Earth is experiencing a fever, that's the way I see it. You go and you break into a sweat, and things change. You get chills.
Yeah, this is like Gaia theory. James Lovelock's hypothesis that the Earth is a living organism, and living organisms respond to assaults and insults and things like that, and that eventually the planet is either going to die or it's going to fight back. And I think you could extend that to say that, COVID might even be a way of fighting back. Not that the planet said, oh, I'm going to intentionally send a virus to attack these people. But, it's kind of the laws of physics sort of thing. As we push into areas that traditionally haven't had humans, we're going to encounter viruses that traditionally haven't infected humans. And here we are.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm thinking that maybe we look like bugs, that they have to get rid of. The planet needs, humans have caused a lot of rashes and a lot of hot spots, if you look at infrared images of the Earth and all the cities.
70% of the non-ice covered landmass of the world is now occupied by humans. And 90% of all the mammalian biomass on Earth is humans and the mammals that we use for food, which would be largely cows and pigs. There's also goats and sheep in there. And that has happened just in the last 300 years. And, which is, if the last billion years, not even the 5 billion years of the history of this planet, but the last billion years, which is when life really started to proliferate on this planet, was a year. All of this human activity that has just wiped out the natural world, and we've talked before on this program about the insect apocalypse. We don't see bugs anymore, and therefore when we moved to Portland here 15 years ago, there were swallows everywhere because there were bugs everywhere. There's no more bugs and there's no more swallows. This is the predictable consequence of this, and this would all have happened in less than a fraction of a second in the history of the Earth. It's sort of like, a sudden infection. You live for 60 years and all of a sudden you get an infection and boom, you die really quick, as happens so often with COVID. It's like the same thing's happening with the planet. Bruce, I got to move along, but thanks for the call. Liano in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Are you the guy that I was talking about this morning that David Sirota wrote up in his Daily Poster?
Yes, I am. That's exactly right.
Hey, Liano, let's see. Your last name is Sharon or Sharon? Sharon?
Liano Sharon, yeah.
Leanna Sharon, so, David was writing that you were one of the lead guys among the Michigan insurgents who rose up and took over the Democratic Party, or are trying to rise up and take over the Democratic Party in Michigan. You guys have an election tomorrow. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so we started back in 2016, and we've been making great strides every year since then. In 2017, we won about around 40 positions on the state central committee. Then we won a few more in 2019. In 2020, myself and another young woman named Zara Abbas got elected to the Democratic National Committee. So we won a third of the elected positions to that. So we've had a number of victories along the way. They covered some of that in the Daily Poster article and David Schroeder's article. There's a bunch more. There's an article that I wrote on the progress report for the political revolution in Michigan on my blog there that you mentioned, Michigan Progressive. And right now we're organizing as My Solidarity, misolidarity.org, where we've been recruiting people to participate in the Democratic Party and to run in the party elections, which, as you say, are coming up tomorrow. Tomorrow we will elect 172 delegates and 172 alternates to the Michigan Democratic Party State Central Committee. And we are running over 100 different candidates across the state. We've got candidates from Ironwood all the way over, almost in Wisconsin, down to Detroit. And we're phone banking, we're text banking, we're sending emails, we're doing everything we can to get the word out to Michigan Democrats. If you're a member of the Michigan Democratic Party, and you have been a member for 30 days or at least since January 21st, you have a right to vote in the party, and you should come out and vote for the Solidarity slate.
Okay, 2 questions, and we're going to hit a break here in about 3 minutes, so if we can get through these. First question is, according to David's article, there are about 10,000 members of the Democratic Party in Michigan. To become a party member is more than just registering as a Democrat, correct? What's the process in a nutshell?
That's correct. To become a member of the party and a voting member, you have to actually join the party. You can join the party through misolidarity.org, misolidarity.org. You can also join the party for free on their website, though it's difficult to find where the free link is, but it is there. But you can join for free through our group, and we will manage all of the all of that, getting you signed up. We are set up to send you updates on when there's going to be a vote, when there's going to be something happening, et cetera.
Got it. So this is all at MI, as in Michigan, misolidarity.org. So I think the most important question I have for you, Leanna Sharon, is for people who are not in Michigan who are listening, how do they do what you did?
Well, the key thing is to think, like they said in the article actually on the Daily Post, is think institutionally. Think about, how do these things really work? What I've discovered in the Michigan Democratic Party is that the vast majority of people in the party have no idea how the rules work or what the rules say. They're doing things by rote. They're doing things the same way they did them before, the same way their predecessors did them, and they're not questioning any of that. And why should they? Because their predecessors presumably knew how this was done, et cetera, et cetera. The vast majority of people in the quote-unquote establishment, I don't have any problem with them. They're just doing what they think is the right thing. The problem is there are a few people who know that these are not the right things to do, who know this specifically, and there are, and as a result of that, they tell the rest of the establishment, hey, this is how you should do things, and they go along with that. And the problem is
so step one is to weaponize the rules, right? Know the rules and weaponize the rules. Wouldn't a preceding step be to get as many progressives as you can to become members of the party, and even better, to become precinct committee persons?
So that's an interesting question. So, for example, in Michigan, precinct committee persons don't have any more power other than they don't have to go through a 30-day period where they can vote. In Michigan, anybody who is 16 years of age or older and a resident of Michigan can join the Michigan Democratic Party by filling out the form, and you get a full.
Okay, so that's going to vary from state to state. But still, getting inside the party, whether you become a precinct committee person or simply a voting member of the party, and you need to figure out how it works in your state, is job one. Job two, find the rules, read them, and if you can, weaponize them. Any other advice, Liano, Sharon? We have 30 seconds.
Sure. So I would just say that you show up and do it. Don't let anybody tell you can't. Don't let anybody tell you shouldn't run. Don't let anybody tell you that you shouldn't do whatever's on your mind that you want to go out there and do in the party. Go and do it, and you'll find people along the way that will do it with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, there's a lot of progressives out there, and we need to be coming out of the woodwork and taking over the Democratic Party on a state-by-state basis. Liano, Sharon, once again, your websites?
My Solidarity, misolidarity.org, and michiganprogressive.com.
Great, michiganprogressive.com, MI as in Michigan, misolidarity.org. Liano, Sharon, with all of the above. Liano, thank you. It's great talking with you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And Joyce, Liano's still on hold on line 4. If you want to pick him up and grab his contact information, I'd like to continue these conversations with him in the future. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Michael in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Michael, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
Yes, thank you, Tom. One issue with all this coverage about Texas and all of the tragedy in this over the last week, other than Brad Friedman yesterday on his Green News report pointed out the U.S. military. My wife is a great researcher, and she looked it up this morning. There are over 200,000 active duty U.S. military in the state of Texas. 10 major installations. They generate $75 billion in GDP for the state of Texas.
Wow.
Now, 200,000 active duty military. That's Air Force, Navy, Army, and Marines, and probably Coast Guard.
So what's your point?
That's got to be close to 1/5 of our military that has been sidelined, that has been out of action for a week. What I would suggest is that...
Well, do you know that? I'm guessing a lot of these military bases actually did winterize because they are under federal control. That's federal property, and the whole point of Texas getting their own grid was to avoid federal regulation. But the military bases, I'm guessing they have power and water and everything else. Do you know otherwise?
Not necessarily. They normally buy their electricity at least off the grid, off the local grid.
Yeah, it does make sense. I would think they would have backup capability. But anyway,
they do have some backup, but who knows? But what I'm suggesting is next week, after all the electricity is back on, the power is back on, that the Secretary of Defense call up the governor and tell him that, first off, demand the winterization of all the utilities at no additional cost to us. With those 10 major installations, we have got to be you and I, the U.S. government has got to be one of the largest consumers of energy in the state of Texas. If they don't do that at no cost to us, then we're going to start redeploying troops to other states that do take care of us.
Yeah. Although that process
One-fifth
is
of our military
really
being
expensive.
out of commission, that is astronomical.
Yeah.
You know, I hope China and Russia haven't been looking at that. You know, it would be the perfect time.
You can count on their having
You
done
see
so.
what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, if Democrats were running Texas, you would have Republicans running around hysterical on television right now, going, "Oh my God, here come the Russians, or here come the Chinese. They're going to attack us."
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Greg Abbott didn't just go ahead.
Yeah. If we started redeploying our troops, I mean, Fort Hood, Texas, 2 Army divisions and a Corps headquarters in one base.
Yeah, and then you got a giant Air Force installation in San Antonio. You got stuff all over the state.
And
yep.
The Navy in
No,
Corpus Christi.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah. Michael, thank you for the call. Spot on. 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So we've got a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com for folks who are supporting the program about how big pharmaceutical companies might be the lever that the healthcare industry uses to destroy Medicare for all, or even a public option as we move into and toward the Biden administration. And how do they do that? Well, they're spending $30 billion a year on advertising. The United States is the only country in the world, the only developed country in the world, that allows drug companies to advertise with very, very few restrictions on television. Only one other country, New Zealand, allows any kind of drug advertising on television. But in the United States, the door is largely wide open. And as a result, all of the television networks are hooked on money from big pharma and big health, as it were. You can check out all the details over at ThomHartmann.com with our new video for the supporters of our program. Thank you. And welcome back. Everything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Peggy in Newburgh, Indiana. Hey, Peggy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just am trying to figure out why DeJoy is still in his position and he's still up to his dirty tricks. They're talking about raising the price of stamps again and all of this. He's still working in the background and people aren't paying attention. I
agree, and I'm outraged about it, and there's several members of Congress who are trying to do something about this. The situation, unfortunately, is that, or whatever, this is just the situation. The post office, like Amtrak, is not a division of our government. It's a separate, standalone corporation that the government essentially owns all the stock in. And so it's not like Louis DeJoy as Postmaster General is like the Secretary of Defense, or some functionary in the Department of Homeland Security or something, where the president can simply say, "You're out." Instead, he's an employee of a corporation that has a board of directors. That board of directors is called the Postal Board of Governors. There are, as I recall, 10 members on that board. Right now, 3 of them are Democrats and 7 are Republicans. Again, I'm doing this from memory, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. And if I'm off, it's by 1. It might be 4 and 8, but I'm pretty sure it's 3 and 7. And those appointments had not been made during the Obama administration. The Obama administration kind of overlooked that, and there was, apparently some obstruction from McConnell in the Senate, although I'm not real clear on the details of that. But the bottom line is Donald Trump came in and was able to appoint all 10 members of the Postal Board of Governors. The Postal Board of Governors then hires the Postmaster General, and they're the only ones who can fire the Postmaster General unless there is cause. And I would argue that by destroying over 600 high-speed sorting machines, multi-million-dollar machines across the country, slowing down the mail, damaging the mail in order to cause Americans to lose confidence in our postal system so that we will go along with privatizing our postal system and selling the whole thing to FedEx or UPS, one of these big Republican donors. I would argue that that is an abrogation of their job. That is a failure to perform their duties. That is, firing offense. And that Joe Biden needs to fire all 10 of the members of the Postal Board of Governors and install his own Postal Board of Governors, who can then fire Louis DeJoy, again for cause. And I think this can be done. There has been legislation nationally introduced into Congress. I don't know if it's a law or if it's a resolution, but calling for this to be done. And it's one of those things where we need to devote some activism to it. And we need to let President Biden know that this is important to all of us, frankly, because I think that if it just continues to fester, it's going to get worse and worse. Peggy, thank you for raising a really important issue. Randy in Gardnerville, Nevada. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind?
Morning, Tom. With regard to the student loan program, over the years, I've often wondered, would it be a bone of contention about how the creditors are made whole? I mean, if you're going to get it passed, you've got to get by that issue.
Oh, the easy way you do that is you just pay off the loans. And
who pays off the loan?
Well, the federal government borrowed $1.5 trillion in 2017 to give tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations. $1.5 trillion, by the way, is the exact same amount as all of the student debt in America combined. So all you have to do is reverse Trump's tax cut, and you have $1.5 trillion in additional revenue. You take that money, and we were doing just fine before Trump's tax cut, and it didn't stimulate the economy. It just made a lot of rich people even richer. So you just reverse Trump's tax cut going forward. You're going to have another $1.5 trillion in a year or two that you didn't have before, and you use that to pay off everybody's student loans, make the lenders whole. As I recall, about 60% of that is federally underwritten loans, and the ones that are loans specifically from the federal government could be forgiven, without having to be paid off. But I think that's a very small minority. I think most of them are agencies and whatnot that are backstopped by the federal government, and those would have to be paid off. Does that make sense, Randy?
No, that I understand. I can get behind all that. Thanks for making it clear.
Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very much, Randy. Good to hear from you. Phil in Wooddale, Illinois. Hey, Phil, we have a minute to the break. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Real quick one. I heard a representative from Mississippi, Benny Thompson, who was talking about the 14th Amendment, Section 3, basically saying no. Oh, you know about that?
Yeah, no more Trump. He can't run for office because he led an insurrection, and I'm totally down with that. I think it's great. Congress needs to do it.
I think it's great, too. And I just basically then want to remind your listeners that if they write to their congressmen or senators, or even just call them and say, hey, a simple majority, a simple vote of a majority in the House and the Senate will make this thing happen. And it might be our
That's correct.
Sword, hallelujah.
That's correct. And Donald Trump will not be able to run for office, which means he won't be able to run fundraising appeals to line his pockets like he did after he lost the election, and then in a 2-month period raised over $400 million, all of which is sitting in his checking account down in Florida right now, as far as we can tell. Phil, thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be back with at the third hour of Anything Goes Friday right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the, after the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment.
They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me. HD and how it can be. So this is our ADHD, how to succeed as a hunter in a farmer's world.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. 6 minutes past the hour. Anything Goes Friday. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Charles in Hollywood, Florida. Hey, Charles, it says you're listening on Sirius XM, and I just saw a tweet that they were playing a repeat of Monday's show. Are you hearing our live show on Sirius XM right now? Charles?
Oh, hello?
I'm not hearing Charles. Hey, Charles.
You can hear me? You can hear me?
Yeah, did you hear me?
Yes, I did. And I was saying no. I had to go to my TuneIn app.
Really?
Because I need to find you.
Yeah. Oh, well, we've got to figure out what's going on. Why our stations aren't carrying a live show right now? It's got to be must be a satellite problem or something. I don't know what it is. Anyhow, so what's on your mind, Charles?
It's not the only day this has happened, Tom.
Oh, really?
Yes. So I've been kind of going back and forth between you and Sirius, but
yeah. Well, we were all screwed up on Tuesday and Wednesday because of the power failure. It reset a whole bunch of internal servers, on our end. But I thought we had it all cleaned up here. Anyhow, Charles, to your call, your question.
Yes, I need to rant. First of all, I need to get this off my chest. Jobs. Call your senators. Call the White House, because we can now call the White House, and call Congress. Please let them know that it's great and well that we get into the Paris Climate Accord and we want to help the people on the border, but let's not forget the attention span of the American people, and let's not, we know about COVID, I think we're on the track with COVID, but we need to walk and chew gum with jobs, because like I said before the election, no matter what happens, people need to have jobs first, and then we can go into everything else, Democrats. Second of all, I just heard this lady about the stamps. Anytime you raise prices on stamps, to me, it's essentially taxing working people. And I'm calling in today about this energy efficiency. This job energy efficient stuff about what these Republicans, what I hear on Fox News, and I'm thinking it's a bunch of crap. They're just trying to stop us, I think, from the Green New Deal because...
Of course they are.
First of all, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, of course they're trying to stop the Green New Deal because they're taking money from the fossil fuel industry and the billionaires who got rich on the fossil fuel industry.
Right, but you know, if we're so energy independent, why isn't, you know, the state of Texas, like, what, do they get a subsidy on their oil? Do they get a subsidy on their natural gas, on their gas? I mean, if we're so energy independent, why is gas prices so high at the pump right now? Everything is supposed to be low, and you tax the rest of the world if you're shipping out that oil. And on the you know, for the green energy, I think if we could do more, let me see. If we were more exponentially more green on energy, that would break the monopoly oil, you know, that Saudi Arabia has on us. If we were that bold, you know, we can also, the Democrats can subsidize 50 million new electric cars to the middle class and low-income individuals, and that would create jobs, that would strengthen union jobs, that would rebuild the middle class. We could compete against the global competition. Imagine with our workforce and our diversity, the progress that we can make, you know, in just developing a brand new electric car. This is also a matter of national security. American billionaires, especially fossil fuel, have declared war on the green energy. I believe it's because of their greed and to still maintain power. Their grip on Washington and state houses and, you know, legislators across the country just to develop green energy, because I think they're afraid that with green energy, people will develop, you know, more. You'll get more individuals that's also going to gain wealth, and they're going to have to compete and against, you know, other people that's making a lot of money, and I don't think they won that competition. It's competition, of course, and I think that's, you know, what we need to break up these monopolies and these billionaires controlling what we have now, because all they do is contribute to the Republicans, and you saw what they did on January 6th. This is because of billionaire rule. And only a few people making the decisions that they're making, and they're ruining our country. So we need to
and this is why the Republicans consistently vote against the will of even the majority of Republican voters, because they don't care. They throw a bone to the voters, you know, come election time, but the rest of the year they're dancing to the tune of billionaires and right-wing corporations and the oil industry in particular, fossil fuel industry in particular. Charles, spot on. Thank you very much for the call. PJ in Shoshone City, California. Hey, PJ, what's up?
Can you hear me?
I certainly can.
Thank you. Tom, I'd like your opinion on interest rates. When I was in college 30 years ago, I had Tom Leary as my economics professor, and we were talking about, I was always taught that we needed to have a modest inflation rate of about 5% in order to keep the economy moving. And somewhere along the line, 12 years ago, we were at about 5%. And in the last 12 years, everything's gotten down to, I guess now it's about 0.5% is the best you can get on a CD. And I'd like your thoughts on the wisdom and if there's any, how can you have a growing economy if you're stagnant on inflation? What's your opinion, please?
Well, I confess to a certain ambivalence about this, PJ. For people who are savers, a high inflation rate and thus high interest rates is a good thing because you can put money in a CD and make money on that. For people who are borrowers, it's a bad thing. It's a tax essentially on borrowers. And one of the reasons that governments like to have a small but regulated level of inflation, typically around 2%, is because what that means is that, you know, if you borrow money right now and you pay it back 20 years from now, every year what you have to pay back is reduced by 2% in its value. The value of the money decreases over time. And we've kind of gotten used to that. But I mean, just look back at the minimum wage in the 1960s was $1.20, $1.23 as I recall, and now it's $7.50, and we want to take it to $15. That's a reflection of the loss of value of our currency, also known as inflation, as reflected by interest rates. So I don't know how to
understand
reconfigure
that.
all this, PJ, but
I
go ahead.
understand that, and I concur with right now with COVID and everyone having lost their jobs. You know, to increase prices on everything would seem to be a bad thing. But however, right now the people that are making money on my savings are the super rich, and I'm not making any return on the money that they are borrowing essentially from me when I put my money in their banks.
The reason, the principal reason why the Fed is trying to keep interest rates so low has to do with debt. It has to do with the fact that corporate debt in America is absolutely massive. I'm sorry, I don't recall the number right off the top of my head, but it's a large fraction of national GDP. And the federal debt is approaching 100% of GDP. And so what that means is that, I mean, right now we're spending $600–700 billion a year paying the interest on the national debt. It's approaching what we pay for military spending, which is substantial. So 10% of the federal budget. Actually, I think that would be like 20% of the federal budget. So if interest rates were to double, the amount of interest that we have to pay to ourselves, essentially, but the amount of interest that would have to be paid, which would actually increase the federal debt, would double as well. Also, there's a lot of corporations right now that are essentially zombie corporations, and they are only living on debt, and they would just collapse. So if the interest rates were to go to 2% right now, which is the Fed target, I think that you would see a massive failure of particularly state and local governments and of many large corporations, and they're just not willing to take that chance. It's like a Ponzi scheme. I mean, I don't see any good way out of it, PJ. I really don't. I got to run. Thank you for the call.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
At some point, I think we're going to have Bretton Woods 2, you know, where basically the world sits down and says, how do we reconfigure this economic system to be just? And welcome back. Let's see here. Dave in St. Paul, Nebraska. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. You caught me with a mouthful. I just
That's because I was a waiter once. That you're trained to do that, you know. Somebody takes a bite, you ask them a question.
Exactly. Thank goodness for Amy Goodman. I just heard a week or so ago about the full legalization of all drugs for Oregon. And we are struggling so hard for the last 4 years trying to get medical marijuana in this state. And I just wondered if there was any local BAP draft or anything and problems with the state of Oregon.
We decriminalized all drugs, basically. You know,
I know.
Here in the state of Oregon. I mean, you know, including heroin and cocaine and psilocybin and everything. As I understand it, the principal sales pitch was for psilocybin, and to keep people out of our jails and stop all the expenses. You know, one of my kids works in addiction and working with, you know, addicts, and that industry or sector or whatever you want to call it, that part of the medical profession, is very excited about the possibility that money is now going to be diverted from prisons into treatment, and that this medical condition called addiction is going to start being treated as a medical condition rather than as a crime. And but it hasn't happened yet. I mean, this law was just passed last November, and it's taking a while for the legislature to institute it and for the government budgets to catch up and all that kind of stuff. But so far, no problems that I know of, Dave.
I'm amazed. Like I said, of course, we are in Nebraska is ruled by Republicans, so you know, I guess it's to be expected.
Well, you know, Portugal did this 20 years ago. And it actually decreased addiction rates. It dropped their addiction rate from as I recall, around 4 or 5% down to 2 or 3%. You know, across all drugs. It reduced alcoholism, weirdly enough, when Portugal did it, and it broke the back of organized crime. I mean, their decriminalization in Portugal was more extensive than what we did here in Oregon. Because I mean, these drugs are still illegal in Oregon. It's just basically possession is no longer a felony. And it's not being enforced. So we should get somebody on who's really knowledgeable about this and how it works in Oregon, because I frankly am not. But I can tell you that, the right-wingers were all huffing and puffing about it for a while, and now they've, by and large, stopped huffing and puffing about it. You're in Nebraska. Are you? I mean, what about just pot in Nebraska? I mean, that's the gateway drug, it seems. Is there any talk about that? Because you've got Republicans who want to decriminalize pot because, hey, it makes money for the state.
It does indeed. They've thrown it out for the last 3 cycles, and they just got gambling, which is a whole other can of worms, But,
which is far more addictive than marijuana.
Exactly. And it's just frustrating. I just thought maybe I'd try to pick your brain on what's going on in the state.
Yeah. Well, the way to sell anything to a Republican is that somebody will make money on it. And so and that's how it works here. I mean, the state marijuana tax is generating serious revenue here in Oregon. Dave, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. You can find an absolutely fascinating library of my writings, including my daily rants, over at thomhartmann.medium.com. Back in the 1950s, or maybe it was the early 60s, I'm pretty sure it was the late 50s, Congress passed a law saying that if churches want to maintain their nonprofit status, if they don't want to have to pay taxes on the millions and billions that they're raking in. I mean, Pat Robertson is now a billionaire from donations and things, from tax-exempt contributions. Right? If you want to keep that money tax-free, if you don't want to have to pay taxes on it, if you don't want to have to pay local taxes, you don't want to have to pay sales taxes, you don't want to have to pay property taxes, if you want to be tax-free, there's only one thing you have to do, churches, and that is don't engage yourself in politics. Because politics is how tax policy is made, and it's just not right. If we're going to subsidize you, all of us taxpayers, you don't engage yourself in politics. Well, in 2017, Trump issued an executive order basically telling the IRS, don't enforce this rule. We've got a whole rant about it up at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. Check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Paul in Pasadena, California. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Got a couple of quick things about Medicare, and let's talk about what can be done now and what we know is heavy lifting through legislation. So we know Medicare for All is heavy lifting. The other one that I don't know why Republicans don't hate, actually I do, because they get so much money from pharmaceuticals, is giving Medicare the same rights that the VA has to negotiate drug prices.
Yeah, Bernie released this study a couple days ago showing that the VA is paying 1/3 as much as Medicare does for pharmaceuticals. And we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars here.
Right. So I do have to correct you on one thing on that. I've heard you talk about the timeline about Medicare and Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage was passed by Clinton in '98 as part of a reconciliation. And
Are you
Part
sure?
D was passed by Bush. Yes. 1998.
Huh.
Yep.
I will have to look that up. Let me make a note. Thank you for that.
And then they added the Part D by Bush, and of course that's in sicko. Michael Moore talks about it, like how much money pharmaceutical got to put that clause in there about not being able to negotiate.
Oh yeah, I remember that well.
So okay. We're done with the heavy lifting. Things that can be done now. Katie Porter, who's my representative, love her, is introducing legislation to get rid of the late enrollment penalty for Medicare. Mm-hmm. So most people don't know this. If you don't do it in your initial election period and you don't have group health coverage, you have to wait for the general enrollment, which is January 1st through March 31st, and it won't go effective till July. And there's a 20% penalty for life. So if the premium's I'm just using 150. I know it's like 155 right now. So they got to pay an extra $20 every month for life. Okay. Right. So Katie's trying to get that fixed. But It used to be only 10%, and I'm one of the people. I'm not going to.
Paul, you just faded out there.
10% to sorry, can you hear me?
Try. Yeah, just repeat your last sentence. We lost you for a second.
Okay. So the former administration raised that from 10% to 20%. So that can be reversed.
That was Trump.
So there's some. That was. I'm not using the name Trump. I'm saying former administration.
Okay.
So that can be
a former
fixed.
guy. Yeah.
And the other thing they did is stealthy. So if somebody, we're going back to the initial election period, when somebody turned 65, they put in this stupid rule about 2 years ago. If somebody you got 3 months before and 3 months after to start your Medicare, right? So your Part B.
Right.
So they put in this stupid thing that if you wait until after your birthday month, it gets delayed 2 or 3 months. Why? Just like
it's all just it's all just ways of messing with your mind so that you'll be more inclined to go to Medicare Advantage and give your money to some big insurance company.
No, but I just think that's like something that can be fixed without heavy lifting.
Yeah. I agree.
That can be fixed
I agree.
right now. And there's stuff
and it would be a
that.
very good thing. Yeah.
Yes. That's all I just like let's delineate, let's separate these. What's heavy lifting? What can be done right now?
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it.
Pass it on to
Thank
my
you, Paul.
representative, Katie. If you could pass it off to Ro Khanna, and I can't think of the guy's name from Wisconsin, but
Mark
it can
Pocan.
be done.
Yeah.
Let's look at what can be done. Yeah.
In fact, I think they're both going to be on the show next week. You might even want to call and talk to them. Paul, thank you. Thanks for the correction. If I'm going to Google this and track down 1998 Medicare Advantage. Michael in Edmond, Oklahoma. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Greetings from a fellow hunter in a farmer's world. I wanted to talk about.
Thank you, Michael. Can you get a little closer? Can you get your mouth closer to your microphone? It sounds like you're talking to us from the can.
I'm on a Bluetooth. Hold on, let me get back over there. And is that better?
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Your question yesterday about how to effectively call out the Republican lies and when the media is going to stop letting these lies through. I believe we need to be aware of this red meat phenomenon and understand that it's not just Republicans throwing red meat to their base. They're throwing red meat to us, and we need to stop falling for it. They know they're lying to us, and they depend on our reaction. And when I engage with that, with friends and family or neighbors or whatever, and fight to try to convince the other side that I'm right and they're wrong, I'm only rewarding them, and I'm only harming myself. You know, a previous caller, you were talking about addiction stuff, and there's a lot of reason to say that I need to take care of myself first. I mean, we know, of course, Abbott's wind turbine and Green New Deal blame game is a lie. Any curious person could easily verify those facts, and he's throwing that red meat out to distract us from the obvious cause and to deny his part in creating it.
Well, and also to suck up to the fossil fuel industry that funds his campaigns.
Oh, of course. He's been carrying water for them for decades. Absolutely. I hear the break music coming up. Cruz doing the same thing with tweeting out while he's literally on the plane to Mexico about, we need to look at Cuomo and the nursing home investigation. You know, it's like a robber throwing baloney out of his pockets when he realizes that Doberman is out.
Right. To get rid of the guard dogs. Michael, thank you for the call. Spot on. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It is Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back.